And the one thing that occurs to me in terms of people in this room on that, there are many things to be done, including the Justice Department stuff, but I'm very struck that at the Tea Parties, by the degree to which, sometimes in slightly odd ways, but the degree to which they've embraced limited government, not just as a slogan, but really as a principle, and have embraced constitutionalism in some way as a principle. I mean, it is interesting that it took a populist movement to sort of say, well, wait a second. I mean, I don't know whether an individual mandate is or isn't unconstitutional, or should or shouldn't be, depending on which form of originalism you care about. But in any case, that didn't come, I mean, that came somewhat out of, I suppose, some law professors' articles, but it also came out of just people at the Tea Party saying, wait a second, can the government do this? And the general sense that it is unwise to have a sort of untrammeled, unmoored federal government with no constraints, no settled rules of the road, I think it turns out that had penetrated pretty deeply into the public. So there is really a potential to have what I would consider to be kind of a healthy, constitutionalist populism or populist constitutionalism on the right in the next couple of years, which I think is the only way you win and the only way it's worth winning in American politics. Constitutionalism that's severed from the people can't just, in a democracy, the people do rule, and it needs to have popular support. It can't just be some law professors, and then the public is like clueless as to why any of this matters. But conversely, populism unmoored from constitutionalism can be dangerous, obviously, and foolish. But I think the good news is now that you have a moment where, more than I can remember, you have both a lot of populist energy against unmoored big government and anti-state liberalism, and a lot of interest in, well, how would one sort of reconstruct constitutionalist type limits and guidelines and checks on government. And I don't mean constitutionalist in the literal sense necessarily of this interpretation or that interpretation of particular clauses or particular modes of statutory interpretation. I mean a broader understanding of a kind of way of thinking about politics, which isn't just we elect a bunch of guys who win elections and they get to do whatever they want. And I think it's a very interesting and unusual moment, and I think it could be a very important one, actually, for the country over the next 2-3 years. So I think what the Federalist Society does and the kinds of investigations you all engage in the law and in constitutionalism really have a kind of relevance today, honestly, that's awfully important. In a certain way, they always had relevance, but in a certain way, when Republican presidents were appointing mostly excellent judges who were coming from law schools and had clerks from the Federalist Society, that was sort of taking care of itself, and there was no need to worry that much about the public as long as they kept electing, Reagan or something as president. And conversely, so that was one sort of model, and then there's the sort of opposite model of we're all doomed, and this is just an academic enterprise. But this is an unusual moment where it's neither enough to simply have one good president appoint some good judges, I think, nor are we doomed. So it's an interesting moment where the sort of concerns of law and the Constitution and at the Academy come together, really, with public and political concerns. So I think I'm particularly happy to be here with you tonight. I think we have a little time. We're not running too late. So maybe I'll stop now and we could take questions for 10, 15 minutes. If you ask brief questions, I'll give brief answers, and ask about whatever you want. I don't know. Don't ask about originalism. You can ask about politics, the media, whatever you want, and I'll see if I can see people raising their hand from back here. Yeah.
You mentioned fluidity in our current politics and related to the Tea Party, and given what you said now about populist constitutionalism, what would you say to the people in the room who really want to use this as an opportunity to rethink our relationship with the federal government in a way that the Tea Party prefers to say, okay, that's not what we want. I don't really want to fight away the New Deal or anything like that. So what are some good guideposts for?
I mean, look, I don't know, it's a good question. And the question is sort of how do you relate in a sense, how does one explain certain things that are bolder, perhaps, or different from what is in the current discussion in the public square or at the Tea Party parties? I don't know. There's no formulaic answer. I myself am probably a little less. On the one hand, it's a fluid moment, and I think it's, as President Obama has said in other respects, I hate this phrase usually, a teaching moment, and I think it's important to do that. Now, I think, on the other hand, American politics is also pretty incremental, usually. One of the things President Obama has suffered from the most is the sense that he's trying to, in 1 year, overturn 1/7 of the U.S. economy and suddenly use his, one election victory as a mandate for something huge, when he's not addressing the practical problems before us. So I don't think it's going to be the case 2 years from now that we're going to have a mandate in the body politic for the most, far-reaching, versions of, libertarian critiques of the New Deal and of all constitutional developments since whatever, 1937 or something like that, whatever the merits of those and whatever the importance of people making the honest intellectual arguments they should make, which I'm always for that. I'm always for that. You shouldn't curb your arguments or restrain your, intellectual curiosity because you think, the time isn't ripe. One of the things I've learned over the years, and this is a very conservative and libertarian point, a very Hayekian point, is how little one has the ability to predict what the time is ripe for, and so things that I would have thought wouldn't have had taken off at all have taken off, and other things that I would have thought would have been really, great political opportunities have fizzled. So I'm basically a kind of a let 1,000 flowers bloom. People should write the articles they want, make the arguments they want, convince candidates to run on doctrines or proposals that they want, and let's see what the market tells us. It'll turn out that there is a market for certain aspects of, let's call it, a kind of constitutionalism, and frankly less of a market for other aspects. And maybe that those other aspects people can be persuaded of them 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, or maybe not. Maybe some things will just not come back to the way or not get to the way some people in this room might like. I think it's just very hard to say ahead of time. I'm generally, more of the one lesson I've learned in politics is you do get these moments with Reagan where you can make big changes, but you do need to have an evident crisis to make big changes. Conservatives should not fall into the Rahm Emanuel trap. Because Obama's unpopular, this is our excuse to advance everything we've ever wanted to advance. People will not react well to that, I think. If what is being advanced is responsive to the problems of the moment and the error and the problems and the fears people have of what Obama and Pelosi et al. Are trying to do, or the equivalent, obviously, at the state level, then I think it's a chance. If you think you need constitutional constraint, if you have ideas of how to, in a constitutionalist way, if I can put it that way, constrain spending, constrain debt, reestablish fiscal responsibility, which has sort of collapsed after the erosion first of the de facto kind of balanced budget constraint and then of other constraints that at least kept some constraint on. If there's a way to respond to that problem, I think there'd be great openness. Things that a lot of us have argued for 20, 30 years, which didn't go anywhere when they didn't seem important, could have great potency in this fiscal climate. But if it seems that conservatives are just trying to do in reverse what Obama and Pelosi and their liberal apologists and mentors have tried to do, I think there would be a backlash, and quite properly so, in a way, against that. So it doesn't mean individual academics aren't entitled to argue whatever they want, but as a political matter, I think it has to be responsive somehow to the crisis. And then when you build up political capital, you get a hearing for further ideas and further proposals that are less immediately important. But I would tend to focus on the tying one's broader ideas to immediate problems, immediate challenges, and immediate problems and challenges that are perceived to be such by a fair amount of the public. But there obviously are a lot out there that are really, that are genuinely pressing, and I think people are open now to rethinking. The way in which we run our budgeting process, the lack of constraints on debt and all that sort of thing, just seems to have gotten us into a terrible position. The blurring of public and private sector. There are lots of areas where one can imagine a pretty bold agenda, I think, of reform. Other areas where maybe it's better for now just to do some incremental changes and revisit them 5 or 10 years from now.